Welcome back, everybody, and this is episode 21 of the Late Stage Podcast. And yes, you hear those bells. It's the holiday season, it's that time of the year. For some of us, it's festive. For others, sorry to trigger your PTSD there, but moving along. Lots of news to talk about this week. This episode, I should say. I don't come in weekly. I'm trying. We'll get there. There's some technical stuff to talk about, but I won't even really bother with that. Something to do with YouTube only uploading episodes once per week, so it has to be sort of extended out. And blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the important thing is that we're here, and we're here to talk about the news. This episode is really all about Peru. The president, Pedro Castillo, or one could perhaps say former president. He has been impeached and arrested. We'll talk all about that, of course. And I'll go into details on it and give my hot takes and the usual. And of course, I could have talked all about there's so much going on in like the Middle East. Of course, Qatar with the World Cup, and I'll give a couple hot takes there. I wanted to do a little sports segment. I was thinking about doing a little like pop culture TV thing to begin with, as I typically do. But so yeah, like let's dig in. There's so much to talk about, so let's do it.
Operation is in effect as of right now.
So first of all, I always try to start things with a little levity, I guess you could say. And I would be remiss not to mention that I've recently seen a bunch of TV shows and movies and things that are quite popular out there. If anyone is into Star Wars and the like, there's a new show out on Disney Plus called Andor. And I'm not obviously getting paid to say this, right? I'd love to be in that category, frankly. But the show is amazing. Like, I am a huge Star Wars fan, always have been. And for me, it's, I think, perhaps, and of course, it's the being a prisoner of now to some extent, but I thought it was the best Star Wars I've seen in a long time. And that's saying a lot, considering, well, I won't give any spoilers or anything like that. Needless to say, it was fantastic. Beyond that, if you've seen Wakanda Forever, if you're a fan of the Marvel MCU, recently went out with my daughter and saw that, had a great time. Of course, it relates to so much of the stuff that's gone on in the past in those films. It requires so much catching up. I don't know how accessible any of these things are for anyone who just like wants to just like dive in and see one of these things from the get-go. There are so many references to things that have happened before, so many characters coming in that you're like, oh. And of course, there's the whole fact that it's leaning on this whole history of comic book lore, and there are hundreds and hundreds of comic book heroes, and they just sort of pluck them out occasionally, and so a lot of the draw, I think, is for folks who are into that kind of a thing. But if you are, Wakanda Forever certainly... I had a blast with that too. That's my little pop culture moment for all of you. My recommendations. Whoa, the real shocks there. I'm sure no one saw those movies or shows coming. Real off the cuff stuff here. Digging deep. Cult classics. No, obviously these are giant cultural thing. I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you that you should see them if you're into that kind of stuff. Anyhow, with that said, I am, so there's that. Sports, and I was initially thinking of doing this whole episode on things going on in the Middle East and in Asia at large. There's so much going on, and I could have talked about the death of Yana Zakarne, 16-year-old girl who was shot on a rooftop in Jenin. Of all places, right? Anyone who knows about the history of Israel, Palestine, the Israeli occupation of various regions of Palestine that are contested, That's putting things very diplomatically. There's what they call the Battle of Jenin, but which was in fact, I think, the massacre of Jenin in 2002, 20 years ago. To celebrate that, a young girl was shot on the rooftop in Jenin, and there's all kinds of weird apologetics going on. Oh, what are you doing on a rooftop in a battle? And I mean, where people live. You know, maybe she wasn't aware there was a battle going on when it erupted. But beyond all of that, or perhaps she was trying to see what was going on, you know, trying to get a vantage. Whatever the heck happened, it's a tragedy and poorly timed, obviously, given, again, the 20-year anniversary of the massacre of Jenin. And while we're in that region, we could have also talked, of course, about the capital punishment of Majid Reza Rahnavard, 23-year-old gentleman in Iran. He was accused, though these accusations were sort of kind of a wide net cast, and they just pulled someone in who happened to be at this event, is what's claimed. But he was accused of stabbing 2 members of the Basij, which sounds like some Nazi crap, if we're going to be 100% honest. Like, it's called a volunteer force deployed to suppress dissent. It's called. That's what the Basij is in referencing. And, you know, aside from the whole brown shirt Nazi aspect of that, I'm not going to say anyone should be stabbed. That's not what we're here to talk about. I guess the claims themselves were tenuous, and obviously it's a tragedy that this guy was killed by the state there. He's the second kind of, you know, in quotes, official killing. Obviously, Mahsa Amini being killed on September 13th spurned all of this that's gone on since in Iran. Since then, you know, there are claims of about more than 300 dead in protests. Not like, you know, capital punishment, but in protests, efforts to suppress protests and the like. I don't know if that really shouldn't be classified as capital punishment, but for the sake of differentiating, I guess, yeah, more than 300. I've heard claims where it's actually up above 400. So, yeah, a lot of people dying, fighting for their rights and for justice and for a lot of things that we claim are very important to us here in the United States and in a number of other places where I might have listeners. But so, yeah, lots of stuff going on in that region. And, of course, there's talk of Qatar, which I think could be a fun little segue on another note, which it shouldn't be. I think a lot of attention needs to be placed on what is going on in Qatar as far as, like, the build-up to the World Cup and the human rights abuses going into the treatment of migrant workers and the hundreds or even thousands of deaths, you know, and that, again, is a claim that's wide-ranging. Certainly a lot of people have complained about inhumane living conditions for those workers that were brought there to build stadiums and the like and facilities for the World Cup. An entire city was built for the World Cup, I think. But so, you know, hashtag on that, or rather an asterisk on that, I'm not entirely... at least there was a new stadium built in a region where there was not a lot going on prior, and so they filled it out a little bit. All of that aside, right, there's actual deaths and human suffering involved in building the layout for this World Cup, which stoked a lot of controversy, but like credit to, honestly, only the players on the pitch who made a World Cup that could have been marred by just constant complaints in regards to what I've already been talking about. They really brought attention to the football out there. It was such beautifully played football. I think anyone who loves football and who can admit it, you know, with everything I've said, will agree that this was one of the better tournaments that's ever occurred. I've unfortunately, given how old I am, lived to see quite a few, and it's certainly one of the most entertaining I've ever seen, if not the most. And the final, Argentina beating France, Messi getting his championship. I think it's now undeniable that he's the GOAT, greatest of all time. He's got that World Cup now, and he got it with a team that frankly was not that great. His supporting cast was not fantastic. He certainly carried them all the way there. including 2 goals in this final match. And I think a hockey assist, perhaps, if not an actual assist. He gave them the lead with a penalty in the first half. I think had the hockey assist for the second goal also in the first half, if not the assist. I think he might have had the assist. It doesn't matter. It's not important. We're not a sports podcast. But he then scored the third goal right before extra time, which, so he gave them 2 leads. Mbappe with some magic to equalize, and then it would go to penalties eventually. So 2-0 up, Argentina gives up the lead. France equalizes. Messi gives them a second lead. France equalizes again via Mbappe's second goal. They go to penalties. Argentina wins it. Their goalkeeper coming up heroically, Emi Martinez. And, besides the fact that Emi Martinez might be the player of the match, I don't know, Messi had 2 goals. Let's not exaggerate, I guess, but huge saves, obviously, with the penalties. And another huge save late in the game that could have given France the dramatic go-ahead goal before penalties. So heroes abound, I suppose, for them. It's ironic, though, that the other Martinez, Lautaro, was just terrible. He flubbed a number of late chances in the match for Argentina, so not everyone gets credit, but not every Martinez for that matter. But fantastic stuff from Argentina. Fantastic stuff from Messi. I think the GOAT conversation is settled. One of my friends said that for anyone who really knows football, that's already been settled for a while, just given the longevity of Messi and how he's still playing at such a high level, whereas Ronaldo's clearly fallen off quite a bit. I think that's indisputable. You can't really debate that. Whether, at Ronaldo's height, he was a better player. Again, that's subjective, and it's what you consider to be a better player, right? If it's more goals focused or more kind of all around play. I think if you're, Messi did everything exceptionally well. And now he also has the World Cup to boot, so it's hard to argue with the output and the 4 Champions Leagues. Yeah, Messi has done it all. But so let's talk about our main news cycle. Woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? We could have talked a whole episode about all those things around the Middle East. Could have talked about Palestine for an entire episode. I mentioned it previously. Could have talked about Iran. That deserves a lot of attention. I wish I could get a good interview on that to get some sort of local insight or, at least an expert in that field. And by that field, I mean Iran. And of course the World Cup. We're not a sports podcast, but I feel like you have to talk about that a little bit, right? But we're going to talk about Peru. And Peru is so important because I think it sets a precedent globally. And it's like almost a cautionary tale if you look at it from the perspective, certainly of the United States, but really for any leftist or left-leaning government that's trying to take power in a place that's, not set up for that systemically. And what do I mean? Let's dig in. Let's talk about Peru and President Pedro Castillo. Or should I say, former president. And of course, I should not say that because it is not a good thing, and I wish I didn't have to. But in technical terms, I think it is accurate to say that because he's been impeached and arrested. Let's dig in. Let's talk all about it. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Peru is a country that has been racked with corruption, financial trouble. Of course, the whole world is struggling with this under the strain of inflation, energy prices up, products also, the prices of products going up, but also production being down in a lot of ways, oil production being down, machinations by OPEC and the like, and of course the war in Ukraine, which is of course the main driver in all of the financial trouble abound, right, all over the world. But certainly it's no stranger to Peru. Peru has been hit very hard by the same stuff that's been hitting everyone. which in and of itself is no surprise. But on top of that, it's been rough going all around. 5 presidents since 2016. Just to highlight some of the miscues that have been taking place there. It's always because of corruption, people coming in and out. Castillo came in kind of unprecedented circumstances. He himself was a farmer, not, an outsider politically, which is very much why people were interested in him, given that history of corruption that I already mentioned. That said, he also was coming up against a very, I suppose you could say, controversial candidate. Certainly, in my opinion, far right, Keiko Fujimori, right, daughter of former president of, Peru, who, very controversial figure himself, to say the least. If you're interested, check that out, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, or on his daughter, because they lost. But it was a close run thing, which is to say that there's a sizable percentage of the country that supported even a far-right candidate like Keiko Fujimori, which suggests that this was always going to be a tight-knit affair for Castillo and a rough thing for him to get much done. The government and systems of government, the Congress and the judiciary systems, especially the judiciary systems, were particularly conservative, but he had a lot coming up against him, especially as an outsider. In a government fraught with corruption and ties made vis-a-vis corruption, as you can imagine, and for an outsider, it would always be tough. But of course, it's complicated, right? Like, you have to be reasonable and think about, of course, the inflation and the economic misfortunes that have gone on. Like, for example, he, in a key example, didn't get fertilizer to a region that needed it desperately, and a lot of crops were not grown, which very much contributed to the already difficult prices in food that they were dealing with over there, which again are most exacerbated by what I've already mentioned. But again, right, like, because of inflation, because maybe a lack of resources on the part of the government, maybe they had to pick and choose what they could spend money on. There's got to be other circumstances that one isn't aware of. And of course, as a former farmer, you'd expect President Castillo to have been aware of the plight of farmers and what they needed. So you'd have to think that he has a pretty good reason. You'd hope. It's not like I can access him and talk to him about it. He's in jail. So that's unfortunate. But also, I'm just a little dude with a podcast. What am I going to say? So, anyway, moving on. Let's talk more about the situation. And I'll try to flesh it out so folks can feel like I'm giving a fair shake to what the mainstream interpretation of this is before I dive into what I have to say about it. And I've already mentioned the economic woes that he was facing. On top of that, the rural vote, he relied on the campesino vote, a lot of farmers and the like. So the price of food and crops and not getting the fertilizer at a key time certainly contributed to his decline in popularity. But it wasn't his decline in popularity that has ushered in the trouble that he's facing. Because that's all happening within the mechanisms of government, which is what makes this a particularly worrisome event. A lot of mainstream media outlets talk about financial troubles and economic woes and his decline in popularity in rural areas and all that, as if it's at all relevant to what's gone on here. And what's going on is that the government has very illegally, I think, ousted an outsider that is not a part of any of their corrupt circles of government. And the reason I say this is, here's the situation, right? If you look at it at its face, they tried to impeach him. He tries to shut down Congress and have it basically like reformed, ousting the entirety of it, which sounds, of course, drastic and extrajudicial and not very democratic. But actually, it's in their constitution that one can do this in times such as these. And times such as these are that this was not the first attempt to impeach President Pedro Castillo. They'd already tried twice to impeach him previously. And what's especially worrisome for me about this is that the first two attempts to impeach him were on the grounds that he was not, quote unquote, morally fit to serve. Morally fit. Now that's got to be troublesome to anyone out there with a fair mind, because morals are about as subjective as things get, right? I mean, what are we talking about? Like, he's a sinner? What was he? Slothful? Was he lazy? Was he a glutton? Did he eat too much? What are we talking about here? Prideful? What do you mean he's morally unfit, right? Like, that's so tenuous, unspecific, and really speaks to the kind of, I think, cynicism at play here, right? That you just have factions of the government that are very much against this guy and wanted him out, and they had a podium to try to make it happen. So I think you see it happening once, you see it happening twice, you see them coming for you, right? And so then you're like, yo, let's dissolve this government, let's start fresh. These people have an agenda very much directed against me. Now that is what prompts the third impeachment, where he's accused of leading a criminal organization to profit off of government contracts and obstructing justice. So basically he's accused of corruption, which, again, the Peruvian government is notoriously rife with, so they'd be implicating themselves if they were really genuinely curious or interested in that. And on top of that, obstructing justice, which is him then trying to dissolve Congress, which, again, in a vacuum, that might be legitimate, but they've tried to impeach him twice on nonsensical terms. So there's a lot of context missing. And again, the dissolution of Congress is something written into the Constitution for exactly this scenario. Now, another congressman, Guillermo Bermejo, I believe is his name, said that opposition will stop at nothing to return power to traditional elites, which I think speaks to a general view on the left in the country that this is an illegal attempt to oust a left-leaning leftist politician before he can really get anything done that would impact their bottom line or allow him to provide for the people that would then vote for him if he was given the chance, right, to do so, to implement anything off of his political campaign or anything that he'd promised as such. But so he's gone, right? They imprisoned him, put him in jail, tried to keep him in there for 3 years. His vice president, Dina Boluarte, stepped in, kind of a backstabber there. He appealed, lost his appeal. Again, they wanted to keep him in for 3 years. They've settled on 18 months, which is harsh, obviously, and just, it's a coup. They've just taken him out. The vice president wanted to see out her whole term, right, or see out his whole term, rather. The people protested violently in many cases. Deaths reported in the streets. All of that. Not in the hundreds or anything of that sort, but a few, no doubt. And the result is that she stepped back on that, on saying she would see out the entire term, and said that they would reconvene and have elections within 18 months or something like that. So it's fascinating on the one hand that this particular leftist project has crashed and burned in the manner that it has, but it speaks to a much larger issue. Now, like the food stuff, the prices of food and stuff, Peru has, according to the UN, the highest rate of food insecurity in South America. Half of the population lacks regular access to sufficient nutrition, which is to say that the issues preceded this man, this president that is being blamed for all of the economic and, specifically issues in this industry. So that's the context under which he was impeached and arrested. And the reason I think it's a cautionary tale, and it's important for people to highlight and to think about and to focus on, and I don't know if there's much that can be done about it at this point. I suspect there'll be another election soonish, and you hope that the left gets together, much in the way that they did in Bolivia when they ousted Evo Morales, and they just go back and vote for his party again, and show these people that you can't just do that. We'll see about that. Now, what is important for people to note is that when the judiciary system of any country is leaning to the right, or is just blatantly far right, you come into these types of issues where anti-democratic, a-democratic, things that don't fit into a democracy, don't fit into a pluralistic way of adjudicating, right? Doing the right thing for the general population. If you have a far-right judiciary system, they're going to prevent, when they are given the opportunity, any progress that anyone on the left or that they view as their opposition is going to try to implement, so that they can stifle their agenda and get their people in, right? It's not like this is a new phenomenon. And of course, the reason it's cautionary is you see it certainly happening in the United States with, Biden doing a lot of positive things as far as his legislation goes. But the stuff that's really taking the news is what the Supreme Court is achieving. And that's just, again, right, like when you have a far-right mechanism in place controlling a third, one of the three major branches of your government, they can do a lot that you might not want them to have the freedom or the ability to do. And Peru is certainly a cautionary tale. My condolences to President Pedro Castillo. I have no sympathy for the scab president, Dina Boluarte. And I really, I can't stress enough how it's not, you can't get this man out of that type of government for corruption when that government is so systemically and historically corrupt that it's, just look up Peruvian government corruption. It's struggled mightily. Again, to the extent that they did bring in this outsider with the hopes that he would do things differently. And frankly, the fact that they've gotten rid of this guy as quickly as they have suggests that he may have been doing things differently, or at least trying. So it's a shame. It's a terrible shame for Peru. Hopefully they can, deal with this electorally and fix whatever wrongs have been committed here. We shall see. And I'm sure it'll be difficult. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of propaganda out there and nonsense distributed, considering who's in the government right now and the mechanisms of power that they're sitting on, with the ability that they have to distribute power. We live in a day and age now where, you can directly access the people who run these social media companies and, the ability for people to communicate en masse. And if those people are corrupt enough, right, as has been the case with Zuckerberg and Facebook and what they've contributed to in the Philippines and in a number of places where they've helped bolster very authoritarian governments' news in order to sort of keep their populace thinking a certain way. Why wouldn't one suspect that could be happening in Peru with the type of government that would oust. I don't know. I love using ouster, and I'm not sure if that's inappropriate usage, but whatever. If you can oust a guy under terms like this, and step in. You're not like, speaking of, what was the term they used? Morally fit to serve, right? So I'm not holding out too much hope for Pedro at the moment. It seems like corruption has won the day. But, fingers crossed, knock on wood, let's hope for the best. And that's it out of Peru. Yeah, I mean, what else can you say about the news out there? You know, speaking of social media, obviously, I'm making a concerted effort not to talk about the quote-unquote free speech platform over on Twitter and what's going on with that dude. In part because I don't even know if you're allowed to criticize him anymore without getting sued. And shoot, I might even have to retract that, or clarify that's a joke, in case he's suing people for joking about him or for parody or whatever is going on. I certainly hope that I won't get in trouble for criticizing Elon Musk. I'm not criticizing Elon Musk. Sorry, not sorry. Joking, not joking. However that applies. I don't think he has any reach over here. Although, well, anyway. Be safe out there, folks. Mind your Twitter. Look for your alternatives. It'd be nice if something came out. So far, Mastodon looks complicated. Post looks, not adequate. So I think that, time is ripe for anyone who wants to get out there and make a big one. But now he's even clamped down, and by he, I mean Mr. Musk, has clamped down on people's ability to even say, like, hey, follow me on other social media networks under the auspices that who knows if Twitter will be there tomorrow or if they'll be allowed to be there tomorrow for that matter. But so if you even say where you can be found elsewhere, you won't be there tomorrow now apparently. So yeah, it's a death spiral over at Twitter. But hopefully we'll all find each other on the flip side. Anyone out there who has found me there. Anyway, peace out, everyone. Sort of a snoozy holiday episode over here. But yeah, bad news over in Peru. No doubt about that. But perhaps good news out of Qatar. I mean, minus the human rights stuff. Jeez. That's an uncomfortable laugh. I'm not laughing at the misfortune of anyone. But yes, look. Fantastic World Cup. Messi is the GOAT. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Everyone stay safe out there. Enjoy the holidays if you can. Or, no. Even if you hate the holidays, enjoy them as you would. Treat yourself, right? Stay home. Have yourself a lovely, buy yourself a new video game or whatever it is that makes you happy. Treat yourself well. Get some nice food. Order yourself the meal that you always want. Take one day to be good to yourself. If you're the type who's alone or, hates the holidays because of that or for whatever reason you might hate the holidays. But if you enjoy the holidays, please enjoy them a little bit extra at my behest. And on that note, I will be back again soon, hopefully with more better news, and that would apply even if there was lots of good news this week, but unfortunately it really applies this week because there's no good stuff out there. Well, go Messi. That's the silver lining, right? Peace out. Happy holidays, ho ho ho.